you as a provider, and if I can use the word inventor or evolver of a data fabric, data mesh platform, what do you see SCIKIQ's role, if you want to talk a little bit about SCIKIQ in addressing some of these challenges? How do you think SCIKIQ adds value?
Yeah, sure. See, I think Noel has already summed it up. When you look at purely from a data fabric standpoint, so what is the end result? What is the end result enterprises are targeting for? So they are looking for a consistent and a unified view of the data. So I'm just calling it out, and I'll build my argument around that, how SCIKIQ is able to help you do that. So it's a unified and a consistent view of data, what you're looking when you are trying to implement a data fabric. And now when you are trying to put a data mesh, because you mentioned two terms here, data fabric and a data mesh. So when you are looking at purely from a data mesh architecture standpoint, here, how you can do it on a distributed or a federated kind of a setup, where you are giving the power to the people who are subject matter expert in their own area, so that they can participate in this data fabrication journey. So I just want to put the two terms out, and before even I get into the SCIKIQ part. So now how SCIKIQ help to create a unified data view. So I'll come to the term unified. Data is scattered all across, right? So data is sitting on-premise, data is sitting on multiple clouds, which means you have a hybrid multi-cloud kind of a setup. We are talking here about large organizations, right? So the problem what we are trying to solve, or the problem which data fabric or data mesh architecture will solve, is primarily for a medium to large corporate, not for a small to medium corporates. So I just want to make that fundamental point very clear. So here, what Noel and I am talking about is a problem of large enterprises where data is spread across multiple applications. So other than the product sprawl, he talked about 20 plus system, 24 plus systems or data management systems in place to solve for a data strategy issue, right? So there is a product sprawl which is happening. And if you count the number of the application, what the average large enterprises uses, it is upward of hundreds, right? So now you have a lot of apps which are producing data sitting across multiple topologies. So how you can build a unified view? So SCIKIQ help you integrate data, be it sitting on your on-premise infrastructure, be it on cloud A, cloud B, cloud C, cloud D, in a unified way. And there are two patterns what we support. Sometimes, you want to move the data, which Noel will not agree, because we have a lot of discussion earlier. So yeah, still there are a lot of companies who want to move the data, want to build lake warehouse kind of architecture. So you want to integrate and move the data and build a central repository like a data lake or a data warehouse kind of architecture. Or second, when he was talking about real time doesn't only means Kafka or implementing something which is a real-time technology. Real time means how you can have a unified, if you are working within a fraud, right? You want to detect fraud at the time of incident, not fraud 3 hours later. So which means a unified or real-time view of the data is very important. And this is where data federation is another pattern which needs to be there, where data is sitting on whatever source it is and how you can have a unified view of the data. So SCIKIQ help you build that unified view. Second, when we talk about consistency is all linked to your data quality. It is linked to your data governance practices. So, you in today's world, you cannot afford, you have one system, which is your traditional ETL, which will pick up data from Teradata or whatever. In Teradata, oops, you realize, okay, my data is in clear. My credit card numbers are in clear because it's a legacy system. Now, if you are modernizing your architecture, at the same time, you need to segregate the PI, which is personal identifiable information. You need to do the information classification. So these are the things which are required, right? So these are not optional, so as to say you cannot put another product. So what SCIKIQ does, SCIKIQ takes care of 4 things. So SCIKIQ has 4 modules. One, SCIKIQ Connect, which connect to any data store. picks up the data, help you either to migrate the data or to set up a Delta or a real-time integration. That's one. Second, SCIKIQ. Once you have data connected and data picked up from the store, now you want to curate the data so that businesses at the end, they can start consuming the data. Data is very ugly. It is not in a shape or a format which is easily consumable by the business. So which means it needs to be cleaned, it needs to be governed, it needs to be wrangled, it needs to be enhanced, it needs to be enriched. So there's a lot of operations which needs to be done in order to curate the data so that business can start consuming it. So that's a curation part. So that module is responsible for curating the data. Third, once you do that, the next stage is like, how we can bring everything closer to the business, because that's the key purpose of having a data fabric in place. Because if you look at the traditional way is all suited for one persona, which is a technical persona. You need to hire a lot of SIs. It's like, you are linearly growing your full-time equivalents, and with your data fabric or data mesh kind of a topology, how you can do a non-linear growth on your data fabric when you are onboarding new sources, right? So third is consumption. So whether it's traditional reports or dashboard, or you want to push data as a service, or you want to push data as a product. So how that platform can support you in solving for multiple consumption patterns which are required for different personas, so that it can cater to multiple personas. So that's a component 3. And the fourth module is underlying all of this, there is a strong layer of SCIKIQ control or SCIKIQ governance, which is responsible for making sure, like, there's a right level of metadata, and metadata get activated. So just having a metadata in some place is not going to solve any problem. So how we are differentiated within SCIKIQ is, I call it as a first generation metadata tool, because, we pick up the metadata first, and then we automate the data pipelines. We automate all the processes using that metadata. We guide the user at each and every step. So the question what we have asked ourselves while designing SCIKIQ is how it is making life easier for the person or for the persona who's using this particular module. So these 4 components are glued together as part of standard SCIKIQ offering. And that's how I think, we are solving this problem. And on top of it, everything is done on a data domain driven architecture, which means like, you can create multiple data domains, which is more tuned to data mesh, or how a large organization, like, they have to manage their data landscape, because that's how the businesses are set up. So to increase the adoption, what we have from day one, what we have thought of, rather than putting data domain architecture later and just building a fabric or a central repository, why don't we start with the data domain architecture first, map everything to the value chain, and from that value chain, based on your persona, because that's how businesses understand technology. They are not in a business of IT, they are in their own business, right? So that's what data domain architecture brings to them.
That sounds really really empowering. And if I could summarize, what I heard is really that you're solving the classical challenges that business faces. I think the traditional approaches use a very linear model of bringing value from the data to the business. And I think what I'm hearing is that you're reducing that time for bringing data to value by saying that you do not need to have stovepipe processes per use case. You can actually have a fabric concept that takes care of it. And the second thing I think that I heard is that the traditional trade-offs and pushing and butting of heads in the balance between governance that typically IT worries about and self-service that business vociferously demands doesn't have to be a butting of heads, that there is a win-all available. We're able to balance the self-service and governance aspects. And I think the other powerful thing I heard is the variety problem, right? I think we often don't talk about the variety beyond the structured, unstructured aspect, but your connectivity to all kinds of not only sources of data, but then applying a domain and being able to handle a variety of domains. So from banking of payments versus fraud versus lending. being able to handle that. I think these are great challenges that you're helping solve with SciKIQ. So could you further elaborate on some real life use cases where some tangible value has been delivered, perhaps using SciKIQ, or what kind of problems you guys have solved in real life?
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. One to cover, the at an enterprise level how we are adding value, and one from a business persona standpoint. And these two examples can also kind of explain how SciKIQ architecture is a little different compared to even a traditional data fabric architecture, because we are hybrid. It's a mix of data fabric plus a data mesh kind of a topology, what we are using under the hood. I'll see the usual fabric cases are like, building 360s. So that's a very usual suspect: employee 360, supplier 360, or your it can be customer 360, right? So let me give you a use case scenario. In order to build a 360, so this is for one of a real estate company. In order to build a 360 degree, you need to so first of all, you need to set up the right domain structure, right? What you're trying to build. Is it a customer 360, employee 360, right? So the way we start, and Vipul, I'll answer it with the practitioner view also, so that people can understand how this needs to be implemented also. We map things back to the value chain. So if I have to take banking as an example, so let's say within the card industry where you and I come from, so I'll map it to customer journey and a transaction journey. Let's say within the customer journey, you have processes like onboarding, you have processes like customer acquisition, retention, and development, right? And on the transaction journey, there is a charge which is happening, there's a billing which is happening, there is a servicing which is happening, right? There is a settlement which is happening. So these are customer journey processes. Based on your value chain within the industry, you define your processes level 1, level 2, level 3. These forms your domains and subdomains within SciKIQ, right? So our thing is like, you are solving for a business problem. So first, mimic your data structure in alignment with your business strategy or your business structure. So that's how we do that. So in order to build a employee 360, the use case what I was talking about, you need to pick up the data. So employees, their data can be mastered in multiple source systems, right? So there is HRMS system where it is mastered from your employee master standpoint. There can be a timesheet system. There can be a compliance system. There are multiple systems. How you bring about all of this data, right, in an integrated manner so that you can build an employee 360. The problem becomes complicated. Now imagine a large organization now, right, where they are using one system which is sitting on GCP, another system which is sitting on let's say Azure, and they are using ERP from a payroll standpoint or from finance standpoint. That ERP is sitting on SAP, which is on-prem, right? So in order to build a 360 view of the employee, the data need to be picked up from all these systems. So this is one of the use case what we are solving. Similar to this use case, we have solved it for a bank where data is cutting across, again, multiple source systems spread across multiple infrastructure topologies, and how it can be unified together. That's the fabric side. And when you are integrating it, you need to solve for, is this a personal information? How my compliance teams, I can take care of my compliance team, how I can set up a right risk management practice on top of it, how I can, draw insights out of it. So the data quality, what Noel talked about, the data quality has also to be integrated. So that's one use case. Second is a very different use case where a fabric was already, enterprise-wide fabric was already put in place in one of the bank, right? Now, when you are building a fabric, or in the old construct, when you are building a EDW, enterprise data warehouse, enterprise architects aim for standardization. They aim for consistency, right? Whereas when you look at different personas, and this is people you and I spoke about earlier also, like, you have fraud, strategic analytics, you have risk, you have marketing, you have sales, different personas. Maybe they have a need to acquire 2, 3, 4 more systems, right? Which doesn't fit within the enterprise change management or enterprise overall change governance process. So now they're left by themselves to ingest the data, right? So how they can create something which is of value for running their day-to-day operations. This is where we are solving for a fraud analytics use case, where data is already sitting on a central repository. From a central repository for a fraud kind of a persona, how you can map different fraud domains. And for those fraud domains, how you can add additional sources and onboard multiple use cases for fraud, which is more from a mesh topology standpoint. So both these can work in tandem. People sometimes get confused, and maybe, Noel, do you agree to that statement? Like, to me, there is fabric, there is mesh, and, people get confused to pick for that.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I mean, data mesh, data fabric confusion may exist, and data fabric, as you know, is a semantic layer which sits above your sources. So you think about it, you got lakes, you got warehouses, you got databases, you got clickstream. So the fabric is above that layer, right? So it sits above this layer. It's a semantic layer containing only metadata, right? And that's what the fabric is the composure of, right? It's not a lake, it's a metadata layer and a semantic layer. It can interface in data sources at runtime and real time, right? So that's fabric. Now, mesh architecture is more distributed, right? Which means that, hey, I actually have what's data distributed, and I'll have a domain, as you called out earlier on. We're going to have a domain for each of these distributed data. We're going to have ownership and accountability of data. So maybe it's finance data separate, customer data separate, right, going on. Maybe the supplier data separate, which is fine, because there are people who know those data better than anyone else in the organization. You have 5,000 people, but there are only like 50 people in the organization knows about supplier data. So that's a domain where these guys will actually own. So when you have building these different domains, and that's what the mesh is all about, you're building products, right? The products is a composure of metadata and data that could be leveraged by different applications or different domains or different fabrics as well, right? But what we see is that, when you have multiple of these data meshes, it kind of, in essence, becomes a fabric, right? I mean, if you connect all the dots together, it becomes a fabric, because you still need a federated governance. You can't actually have meshes running independently of each other. You need to have a federated governance, right? So basically, there's a lot of composure of similarities where people start with a fabric and start to architect into a mesh, or vice versa. You start with a mesh and make it a fabric, right? So we've seen both ways, actually. So, yeah.